everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be doing 3 different looks using the new Natasha Denona Bronze palette that she just launched on the Sephora and her website. This palette retails for $65. It has 15 different shades and I have a lot to say about this palette. I'm going to be doing a lot of comparisons of this palette next to some of the other palettes that I have that are kind of similar in tone. I also bought the new Bronze Cheek Face Glow palette. This palette retails for $50 to $5. I will demonstrate it for you and later on, swatch it and give you guys my thoughts on it. So I did not buy the 3 new glosses that were launched in this collection only because I just bought so many glosses from KKW Beauty that I did not need anymore. So I didn't buy any of the glosses, but I did buy the palette and the face palette. So we're gonna break it down. We're gonna do the first 3 eyeshadow looks with the palette. I'm going to apply the face palette. We will do the comparisons and then we will get into my final thoughts. I will leave timestamps in the description box down below to make it easy to kind of jump ahead to the parts that you are most interested in. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump straight into the eyeshadow looks and I will see you guys all in my final thoughts. Okay, so I just got this palette. It just arrived at my door. It is 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so I better get started if this is gonna go up in the morning because I'm gonna do 3 looks with this, play around with the face palette, and also compare this palette to a lot of different bronze palettes in my collection. So I got a lot of work to do today. Okay, so we're gonna jump in. Like I said, I'm gonna do 3 looks. I'm probably gonna do 1 on each eye and then do 1 like final look for the intro and all that. So I come on camera looking presentable. Love how this lid is really good, meaning that it doesn't fall. There's a lot of palettes that are like this, that if you tip it to a certain area, it will fall. This doesn't. As you can see, it's not falling. The packaging is really, really well made, which I really appreciate. There is only 1 shade in here that is the cream to powder. I am not a fan of her cream to powder formula. It's hard for me to blend. There's a lot of you out there that agree and there's a lot of you out there that disagree. For me, it's just hard to blend. That is the only one that's a cream to powder. The rest of the mattes are cream to matte. First off, I'm gonna start with this shade right here. Sweet Suntan in my crease. Now, the only thing I have on as far as makeup goes is foundation. I have my brows done and I have some eyelid primer on my eyelids. Other than that, I don't have any other makeup on. Put on Sundown. I meant to dip into Suntan, but I put Sundown on, so there's that. Now I'm gonna go into the shade Suntan. And I'm gonna kind of keep Suntan right at the base of the crease, meaning I'm not bringing it up as far as I did the previous shade. Now, for those of you that love warm tones, this might be your dream. So I'm kind of keeping that shade right at the crease. And I'm gonna kind of blend it into that bright orange. Both of those mattes, very blendable, very buildable, very pigmented, like worked like a dream. Next up, I'm gonna go into the shade Magma. I've got my head tipped up and I'm looking down and I'm bringing that shade right there at the middle of the crease, like right at the base of the crease. These matte shades are extremely soft and extremely buildable and like, oh my gosh, they're blending so good together. I'm gonna go into the shade High Degree, which is kind of a really pretty red. I'm gonna press that with my finger right over top of that dark brown here on the outer corner. And I'm just kind of pushing it into the eyelid. So I just picked up a tiny bit of that shade with the tip of my brush and I'm gonna swirl that into this outer corner, just softly. I only want a little teeny bit of that shade into this outer corner. I'm gonna bring a tiny bit of that onto the inner corner as well. Right there. But I'm going to take the shade Magma and kind of work that in to make it a halo, because I really wasn't planning on doing that, but I love that red. I think it's so pretty that I think that shade is perfect for like a really pretty halo eye. So I'm taking it there. I'm going to go back into that Sundown shade. It's that really pretty orange. And I'm going to use that to buff out any of those edges that was created with that pretty red shade. Now I'm going to go into the shade True Copper, which is the first shade in the palette. And I'm going to place that right in the center. And that shade is beautiful. One of the prettiest copper shades. Oh my gosh. Now I did get some fallout with that shade. That was the first shade I got fallout with though. The rest of them, I didn't get hardly any fallout. I'm gonna go back into High Degree, which is that red, just a tiny, tiny bit here on my finger. And I'm gonna like use that to kind of buff those edges with that copper color, just to kind of pull it together, but still have some of that radiant effect. Okay, for the lower lash line, I'm gonna go into Suntan. And I'm gonna bring that kind of low. Go into the shade Sundown, and I'm gonna go right at the base of the lashes with this shade. And I'm gonna go into Magma, smoke this right into the lash line just by using this like back and forth motion right at the base of the lashes. This is a trick that I learned from Jaclyn Hill. To decide what to put on the inner corner. Maybe I should put True Copper. Okay, I'm gonna grab a tiny bit of True Copper with a pencil brush, just a tiny bit. And I'm gonna put it right here. Yeah, it needs to be brighter. Oh, shit skis. Need something light. So I'm gonna use my Anastasia Beverly Hills Emerese highlighter. You can use whatever like golden champagne highlighter that you have. Really need to brighten it up because I made a mistake and went in there with copper. So for look number 2, I noticed that there are 2 kind of purpley shades, and I know that there's going to be a lot of looks created with this palette. A lot of looks on the YouTube. A lot of people are going to be creating looks with it. So I figured maybe you guys might want to create a look with these 2 shades up here. Again, this is the cream to powder formula I'm not a fan of, but I am going to play with it just to get an idea. Because I don't like that formula, I don't want to avoid it in the palette. I still want to play with it and see if it's a bad, shade. So I'm going to go in to the shade Beach. I am going to kind of build this in the crease. That shade's got a nice peachy base to it, which I really appreciate. I'm gonna go into the shade Suntan. I'm gonna bring Suntan kind of right there on the base just to kind of deepen it, but I don't want to bring that shade too far into the look. So now I'm gonna go into Deep Dive and put it right here at the crease, like right there at the base of the crease. All I'm doing is using that shade to add a little teeny bit of purple to the crease, just a little bit. So I don't want it to go too far. I don't want it to overtake, but I also know how that formula works. That formula likes to get dark fast. It's nice. It does. It builds on top of itself really good. Okay, so now I'm going to take the shade Rhodium with my finger, which is this really pretty purple. And I'm going to place this pretty much all over my lid. Okay, that shade is not as pigmented as I was hoping for. It is, but like, it is, but it's not, you know, like I'm digging my finger into it, like digging it. It's beautiful, but like, so it's not as pigmented as some of the other shades that I've used. Let's just put it to you that way. I don't know. I'm not loving that shade. It's beautiful in the pan. Like this shade is gorgeous in the pan. It's kind of like a gray silver purple color. So I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to go into the Rhodium shade, and I am basically going to bring this into the crease and over top of everything that I have very lightly, and just kind of use that shade to go over top. Of course, I'm going to clean this up, so I'm not really worried about that right now, but I'm just using that shade to kind of blend it all together. For the lower lash line, I'm going to go back into the shade Beach. I'm going to bring that to life right up under here, just kind of buffing that in. I'm going to go into Deep Dive, and I'm going to focus that right on the lash line. Okay, I'm going to take the same brush. I'm going to go into the Rhodium shade. I'm going to pop it right below that Deep Dive right on the line. I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to go into the shade Bliss. Pop that right on top just to give it a little bit more dimension. It's the only thing in this palette that we need that we don't have. We need a nice light champagne gold kind of inner corner highlight pop, and this palette doesn't have it. It's the only thing that I'm finding so far that I'm kind of like besides the purple shade. Take my Anastasia Beverly Hills Emerese and pop it right here in the center. Let's move on to the third and final look. I'm gonna go into the shade Ridge. Ridge is a shade I have not used yet, and probably on the lid as well. So I'm just gonna like buff this in. It's pretty pigmented for being as light as it looks in the actual eyeshadow palette. I'm going to go into the shade Magma, kind of carve out the crease here on the outer corner. Not bringing that shade all the way in though, like I'm keeping it right here on this outer corner. So I'm just going back and forth between Ridge and Magma and just building up the outer corner just to build up that depth. True Bronze is a foil shade, and so I kind of want to play around with it and see how it applies. So I'm just kind of pressing it with my finger right here on the center of the eyelid, and then I'm going to kind of slowly kind of blend it into the outer corner. I want to go into Alloy. I'm going to take a fluffy brush. I'm going to go into the shade Alloy right up here on the inner corner. So I went ahead and added some concealer, and I also put some of that Emerese Gold right in the inner corner. I might have gotten a little bit too carried away, so I got to kind of calm it down a little bit. But I'm going to go ahead and buff this into the lower lash line. So I'm going to take the shade Magma and I'm going to lightly buff that into the lower lash line, just like I did in the previous looks, but I am kind of dragging it. So instead of keeping it right on the lash line, I'm putting it on the lash line and then kind of dragging it and pulling it down. Okay, so let's pull out the face palette. I have it right here. So this is what the palette looks like. And this is called a Bounce Cream. I've actually never used Bounce Cream before. And almost a powdery finish. Oh, it's weird. And it, like, doesn't really have much pigment. Am I swatching this wrong? So it's a very light cream, I'm assuming, because these both are Bounce Creams and they really just don't have much pigment. I think I want to add a bronzer first to kind of get the dimension and depth that I'm wanting on my face. And then I'm going to go in with this to kind of highlight it. This shade is holographic and I'm just not into it. And the more that I keep putting my finger into it, you see that? Like I've almost hit pan on it. And you see it starting to lift from the actual palette, or it's starting to lift from all the way to the bottom. Okay, see how it's lifting? I do not like that formula. You see how it's lifting? If I pulled my finger, I'm gonna hit pan on it. I'm gonna put on just a tiny, tiny bit so you guys can see what the shade looks like, but I don't see how this holographic shade is in no way a bronze. So I'm gonna move on to the other one, which I just don't like this formula. So I'm gonna go ahead and put some of this on. This is kind of a, I don't know, like I can't describe this formula. I don't know that I love it all that much. I think the Tan Bronze and Glow is better than this. I'm gonna grab some of this right here and put it over top. Okay, so that highlight is really pretty, like really pretty. That highlight is gonna work for everyone. I have a medium skin tone, so it's working okay on my skin tone. But I think if you're a lighter skin tone, I don't know that you're gonna love that highlighter. I think it might be a little bit too dark for you as a highlighter. I mean, it's pretty, but I just don't think it's gonna work for all skin tones. Now what I wanna do is I wanna take the brush I was using for my bronzer and I'm gonna grab this shade right here, which is the Super Glow Bronze, and I'm gonna add just a little bit and apply it over top of my bronzer, just to give me a little bit of that highlight. Okay, so that's pretty. I am bronzy. So basically what that did was it brought my bronzer full force. Before I had a light bronze on, and then this emphasized the bronzer. Like it took over. So I'm gonna go over top of it with my powder brush and kind of try to calm it down a little bit. I think it's pretty though. I think this shade is pretty over bronzer, but I don't know that this is something I would use every single day. I think I would only use it if I was doing a bronzy look. These two are the only shades I like. I do not like these up here at all. I'm gonna go ahead and go off camera, finish the rest of my makeup. I'm gonna put some lip stuff on, and then we will get into the comparisons of this palette next to some of the other palettes that I have, and then I will get into my final thoughts. So I will see you guys then. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the comparisons of this palette next to some of the other palettes that I have, and then we'll jump into my final thoughts. So first things first, we're gonna jump into the comparisons of the Metropolis palette. Now, as you can see in this image, they're very similar. The Metropolis palette It's almost like the bronze palette is like a mini version of the Metropolis palette. And I will get into the differences between the Metropolis and the bronze palette in my final thoughts. But I wanted to just put up this image so you guys could see the comparison. There are a lot of similarities between the shades. So there you go. But we're going to move on to the Artist Couture palette. So this is the new palette from Artist Couture. It's called the Supreme Nudes. I decided to compare this palette to the bronze palette, and I found some similar shades in case you guys have this palette. So up here on the screen are some images of 5 shades that I found that were similar in the bronze and the Supreme Nudes palette. Then we have the mini nude palette from Natasha Denona herself. This has been one of my favorite mini palettes from Natasha Denona. And as you can see, there are 4 out of the 5 shades in the mini nudes palette that's in the bronze palette. I mean, they're almost exactly the same. I would say they're pretty much the same. I know that sometimes Natasha Denona will use the same shade and change the name. I know that. So I think that's kind of what we're dealing with here. I feel like these are the exact same shades from the mini nudes, just put in this bronze palette. So that's just my opinion, but there you go. Final palette that I compared it to is this palette from Kylie Jenner. I don't even know if this palette is available anymore, but this is her bronze palette. Don't get me wrong, the formula is not near as good as the Natasha Denona, but it is a bronze palette. So if any of you guys have this bronze palette from Kylie Jenner, I wanted to mention this. I only found 5 similar shades, but they are similar. And if you have the, this Kylie Jenner bronze palette, then you could kind of decide whether you wanted to, pay the $65 to get the bronze palette. Those are the comparisons that I did. I tried to compare it to the Soft Glam palette in the Anastasia Beverly Hills palette, but I really didn't find any similar shades. Kind of crazy. They look similar, but I swatched all of them next to them and I couldn't find any shades that were even similar. I don't have the Biba palette from Natasha Denona. I don't have the big gold palette. I don't have any of her big palettes. So I did have the Biba palette, but I ended up taking it back. I ended up returning it because I just didn't use it as much. I'm sure there's going to be a ton of reviews and a ton of different creators here that are going to compare this palette to the Biba palette or the gold palette or several other of the big Natasha Denona palettes in case you are a Natasha Denona collector. I just don't have them personally in my collection. So those are the comparisons. Let's go ahead and move on to my final thoughts. So let's go ahead and get into my final thoughts. And I want to first start with the face palette. The face palette is this bronze cheek face and glow. I do not like this palette. Also, this one is such a weird formula, especially for me to almost hit pan on it. It's almost too soft. Keep that in mind, but I just don't like this. I don't feel like this is worth $55. These 2 up here, I don't like the cream formula at all. This was an amazing palette. This is one of my favorite face palettes from Natasha Denona. She nailed it with this. And I just don't see the reason to release something like this because I don't know. I don't love the holographic up here. It barely shows up on your skin. Maybe if you have fair skin or really dark skin, this holographic will show up on you. But if you have like a light medium, or medium tan skin, I don't think that this holographic shade is going to show up. Of course, I did think that this was really beautiful, but I don't think it's worth picking up. And truthfully, I think that you could get the same type of look using this palette, and I think you would be better off getting this palette. If you want that bronzy, beautiful look, I would grab this palette. I just don't like this. It's not my favorite. I'm going to continue to use it, but this was a huge pass for me. I don't like it. Let me get into my thoughts about the palette. As you guys know, the Metropolis palette has not been my favorite palette from Natasha Denona. And based on my technique, based on the way that I apply shadows, the cream to powder formula is not my favorite. Some people love it and some people don't. So this palette is filled with the cream to powder formula, which is the reason why I never reach for it. I've used it a ton of times to try to really learn how to use the creamy to powder formula and try to get to know why everybody likes it. but for me, it just has been a no-go. I do like the shimmer shades that are in this palette, but because I don't like the cream to powder formula and this palette is filled with it, I just don't ever reach for it. So this palette only has one of those shades. So this palette actually has her creamy matte formula that I absolutely love. So if you either bought the Metropolis palette and didn't like it because you didn't like the cream to powder formula, or you didn't buy it because you know that you don't like the cream to powder formula, you might really like this because I love this palette. Now, do I think that this is necessary in your collection? Probably not. There's a lot of bronzy palettes out there, and there's a lot of bronzy tones that we all have in our collection. So it just depends on if you love this color story or not. But based on the formula itself, because it has the creamy matte, I love this, and I am so happy that I have it. If you have the Metropolis palette and you like the Metropolis palette, you really don't need to spend your money on this, because as you saw in the swatches, there's a lot of similar shades between these two palettes. A lot. Like a lot. And truthfully, maybe some of the shades are not exact, but once you put them on the eye, they're going to be very similar. So I think if you already have the Metropolis palette, you probably don't need to run out and grab this bronze palette. But if you didn't buy the Metropolis palette because you didn't like the cream to powder formula, I think you'll love this bronzy palette because it only has one shade in the cream to powder formula, and I will be using this palette quite frequently, especially in the fall. I love the formula. The only shade that I did not like in this palette was this shade up here. You guys heard me talk about it. Is a duochrome, but it's so weak. You can even tell in the swatches of this shade, it just isn't that vibrant. It doesn't have that much like pizzazz to it, but I think this is a 10 out of a 10 palette. Like, I think this is a great palette because majority of the shades but two I love. And don't get me wrong, I was able to use this shade right here, which is the cream to powder formula, but I didn't really end up doing a lot with it. I didn't try to, you know, go overboard with it. And that was the thing with the Metropolis palette, because all of the matte shades that I wanted to use in the Metropolis palette, for example, some of these like transition shades right down here, these two are both like really good transition shades for the tones that are in this palette, but they're cream to powder, and it was so frustrating for me. Anytime I wanted to create a look with this, I knew that I was going to be stuck using those creamy to powder formula that just does not work. But this bronze palette, on the other hand, it's just amazing. Great pigmentation, blends out like a dream, looks beautiful on the eye, and yeah, I really, really like this. Depends on what you have in your collection, but as far as the pigmentation, the creamy matte instead of the creamy powder, which I'm so grateful for, this palette is a 10 out of a 10 for me, and the face palette, not so much. So those are my final thoughts on both of these products from Natasha Denona. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me in today's video. I hope that you guys all have a wonderful weekend. I will see you guys all in my next video. Love you. Bye.